People don't struggle to choose an intention word. They struggle to live with it. And that's because living it, day after day, through distraction, doubt, and ordinary life, requires an inner architecture that can support real change. In this video, we'll explore how intention becomes embodiment. Recalibration is the practice of listening again. If you've been following along with the series, welcome back. We are quite well acquainted by now, but if we are meeting here for the first time, hello, I'm Rebecca-Monique, an accredited grief and trauma coach and essayist, and this video is part 3 of my intention words guide. I recommend starting with part 1 because that's where we begin the deeper reflection work that helps you choose a word that actually fits your life. I'll link both part 1 and part 2 in the description so that you can easily find them. In part 1, we explore the reflective groundwork, looking at the past year, where you are now, and where your life may be quietly pointing next. In part 2, we refined the word itself. We explore the 6 paths to intention, the 5 types of intention words, and the tools that help you test and refine a word that truly resonates. And now in part 3, we focus on the area that most people struggle with, living with the word. In this video, we'll explore the inner architecture that allows intention to become embodied. We'll look at how change actually unfolds internally, the daily and seasonal practices that help your word take root, and the accountability structures that help you return to it when life pulls you away. So now we arrive at the part that explains why some intentions quietly transform our lives, while others fade after a few weeks. Because meaningful change doesn't happen in a straight line. It follows an internal process, a set of psychological and behavioral layers that shape how a desire becomes a lived reality. I call this framework the inner architecture of change. At the center of this architecture is a loop, a movement that begins with desire and deepens over time into embodiment. It looks like this: desire, belief, behavior, identity, embodiment. Each stage builds on the one before it, and each stage strengthens the next. Let's start with desire. Desire is the spark, the moment something inside you recognizes what it needs. Perhaps you realize that you want more spaciousness in your life, or more courage, or deeper connection. That recognition is where your intention word begins. But desire alone is not enough. For change to continue, desire has to become belief. Belief is where the mind begins to accept the possibility of change. You start to think, maybe I can live this way. Maybe this is possible for me. Once belief strengthens, it begins to shape behavior. This is where the word starts influencing what you do. Small actions, tiny decisions, moments where you choose differently than you might have before. Over time, repeated behavior begins to reshape identity. You stop thinking of the intention as something that you're trying to practice and begin to recognize it as something that describes who you are becoming. And eventually, if the loop continues long enough, identity settles into embodiment. The word is no longer something that you remember. It becomes something that you live. But this process rarely moves smoothly from one stage to the next. Between each layer, there is a space where momentum can falter. I refer to these spaces as chasms. The distance between desire and belief, between belief and behavior, between behavior and identity, between identity and embodiment. Most intentions don't fail because the word was wrong. They fail because we fall into one of these chasms before the loop has time to stabilize. Understanding these gaps is important because once you see where intentions tend to collapse, you can also begin to see how to support them. The gaps between each stage of this loop is where intentions quietly lose momentum, but these are chasms of change. This is where transformation asks us to cross psychological terrain that feels uncertain. And between each chasm, there is also a bridge, a shift in thinking and practice that allows the intention to move forward. The first chasm sits between desire and belief. You may feel a strong pull towards a word. Perhaps you're drawn to something like boundary, visible, rest, or courage. And somewhere inside, another voice whispers, can I really live this way? Is this realistic for me? What if I try it and nothing changes? This is the moment where desire meets doubt, and if belief doesn't begin to form, the intention remains a beautiful idea rather than a direction that your life can move toward. Crossing this first chasm requires what I call the bridge of permission. Permission is the moment that you say, I am allowed to want this. I am allowed to move my life in this direction. Without permission, desire stays hypothetical, but with permission, it begins to take root. The second chasm appears between belief and behaviour. At this stage, you may genuinely believe in the word. It resonates, it feels right, but daily life is powerful. Habits, responsibilities, and familiar patterns pull you back into old rhythms. This is where intention must begin translating into small behavioural shifts. Not dramatic reinventions, just subtle choices that align with the word. The bridge here is commitment. Commitment is the moment that you say, I will practice this even when it's uncomfortable. I will do this even when it's inconvenient. Without commitment, belief remains internal, and the intention never becomes visible in your life. The third chasm lies between behaviour and identity. You may already be practicing the word. Perhaps you are setting clearer boundaries, or creating time for rest, or showing up more honestly in your relationships. But it can still feel like something that you're trying to do, rather than something that reflects who you are. The bridge here is integration. Integration is when repeated behaviour begins reshaping how you see yourself and therefore your identity. You move from, I'm trying to practice this word, to this is who I'm becoming. When the word no longer feels like effort, it begins to feel like truth. The final chasm sits between identity and embodiment. Here you may recognise yourself in the word. It describes who you are, but life still moves. Seasons change, pressure returns. The final bridge is stabilization. Stabilization is when the word becomes a steady orientation rather than an effort. You're no longer reminding yourself to practice it. It becomes your way of being. This is what intention words are really asking of us. Not a single decision at the beginning of the year, but a gradual crossing from desire to belief to behavior to identity to embodiment. And the intention word moves from something that you remember occasionally to something that quietly shapes how you move through the world. But understanding the architecture is only part of the practice. The next question becomes, how do we support this process in everyday life? And that's where micro and macro practices begin to matter. Let's start with micro practices. Micro practices are small daily touch points that reconnect you with your word. They don't require dramatic changes to your life. Instead, they create brief moments of alignment throughout your day. For example, you might begin the morning by simply asking yourself, what would this word look like today? Or you might pause during the day and notice whether your current pace, choices, or conversations reflect the intention you set. Some people like to write their words somewhere visible. Others use a short reflection in a journal. The point isn't the ritual itself, but in remembering the word often enough for it to shape behaviour. These small touch points help you to cross the bridge between belief and behaviour. They keep the intention alive in ordinary moments. Micro practices equal rhythm, reminder, repetition. Alongside these daily touch points, it's also helpful to have macro practices. Macro practices are slower, seasonal moments of reflection. They create space to step back and ask, how is this word shaping my life so far? Where does it feel alive? Where have I drifted away from it? These moments might happen every few months, at the end of a season, or at a natural checkpoint throughout the year, such as anniversaries, birthdays, cultural holidays, grief dates. They're not about judging your progress, but recalibrating your direction. Because intention words are not meant to operate perfectly. They're meant to guide your awareness over time. To make this a little bit more concrete, let me show you what micro and macro practices can look like. In the workbook, I include examples across the different word types. Here, I'll walk you through two of them so that you can see how the structure works. Let's start with an embodied word. An embodied word usually describes a state of being that you want to move toward. One example might be the word unhurried. If your intention word were unhurried, a micro practice could be something very simple. For example, taking a 3-minute pause before transitioning between tasks. Just a brief moment to breathe, reset your nervous system, and to move into the next activity with presence rather than urgency. Over time, small pauses like this begin to reshape your internal pace. Then you might support that with a macro practice. For example, scheduling one empty weekend each quarter where nothing is planned, a deliberate slowing of your wider rhythm. Now let's look at an instructional word. Instructional words guide behavior more directly. An example might be the word simplify. A micro practice for simplify could be something very small. Clearing one surface, one email, one tab, or a drawer. Just a single act of reduction that compounds to a steady rhythm of simplifying. Then the macro practice might be something like a seasonal audit. Every few months, you step back and review areas of your home, your calendar, your commitments, or your finances. A kind of quarterly pruning, When micro practices and macro reflection work together, intention begins to settle into your life. Micro practices shape the daily rhythm, macro practices shape the larger seasons of your life. They function as a way to orient yourself again and again as the year unfolds. But even with strong practices in place, we're still human. Life gets busy, energy shifts, and sometimes the word that once felt vivid begins to fade into the background. This is where accountability structures can help. They're gentle systems that make it easier to return to the intention word that you've chosen. In the guide, I describe 3 accountability pathways that support this process: environmental, relational, and self-accountability. The first pathway is self-accountability. This is the relationship that you cultivate with yourself throughout the year. It might take the form of a short reflection, a monthly journal check-in, or simply pausing from time to time to ask, is my life still moving in the direction of this word? Self-accountability isn't about discipline in the harsh sense, but about maintaining honesty and attention. The second pathway is relational accountability. This means allowing another person to witness the intention with you. You might share your word with a friend, for example, or check in with a trusted person every few months about how the year is unfolding, simply for conversation, not necessarily for evaluation. Sometimes speaking the word aloud or reflecting on it with someone else helps us to see things that we might miss on our own. It turns the practice from something private to something gently supported in relationship with others. The third pathway is environmental accountability. This simply means shaping your environment so that the word stays visible in your daily life. You might write the word somewhere that you see often: a notebook, a mirror, your phone background, a small object on your desk. These cues act as reminders, not loud interruptions, but quiet signals that bring your attention back to the direction that you've chosen. Sometimes the environment does the remembering for you. When these 3 pathways work together, the word has multiple places to live: in your environment, in your relationships, and in your own awareness. Which makes it much easier to return to the intention when life inevitably pulls you away from it. And that brings us to something very important in this practice, because you're not failing when you drift away from your word. Drift is very much part of the process. What matters is learning how to recalibrate when that happens. Even with supportive practices and accountability structures in place, there will almost certainly be moments in the year when you drift away from your intention word. Life becomes full, energy shifts, old habits quietly return. Intention words are not meant to be followed perfectly for 12 months. They're meant to be returned to. And sometimes the most powerful moment in the whole process is when you pause to ask yourself, where am I now? And what does the word ask of me? Again, that pause is recalibration, a gentle realignment with the direction that you originally chose. Recalibration is the practice of listening again. Recalibration is useful when your word feels distant, life shifts unexpectedly, your capacity changes, the word feels too small or too tight, the word feels like a previous version of you. Recalibration is not replacing your word, it's re-meeting it with new eyes. There are a few mini recalibration practices in the workbook. In this video, I will share a few reflection prompts. Where in my life does this word still feel alive? Where have I quietly moved away from it? Is my word still aligned with the season I'm in? What has changed in me since I chose this word? Does the meaning of the word need updating? And perhaps most importantly, what would one small step back towards this word look like this week? You don't need to overhaul your life. Often the practice resumes through one small honest adjustment. Recalibration reminds us that intention words are not rigid rules. Sometimes the work of intention isn't deciding the word, it's learning how to stay in relationship with it. Before we close, it may help to remember how the 3 parts of this entire practice work together. Part 1 is about grounding, understanding the year behind you and the truth of where you are. Part 2 is about refinement, learning how to choose the right word and understanding the different kinds of intention words. Part 3 is about embodiment and recalibration, the practices that help your words stay alive across the year, even when life pulls you away from it. So if you ever find yourself feeling misaligned later in the year, you'll know where to return. Before we finish, here are a few reminders that I often give people working with intention words. The word is not meant to be lived perfectly. Your word may evolve rather than change. Sometimes a word arrives before you understand why you need it. Your intention word may be quietly preparing you for something that you cannot yet see. And most importantly, drift is normal. Return is the practice. If you'd like more reflections like this, I've included 15 top tips and reminders in the closing notes section of the workbook. If there's one thing I hope that this series leaves you with, it's this. An intention word is not something that you choose at the beginning of a year. It's a way of paying attention to your life. Some weeks the word will feel alive and natural, other times you'll forget it entirely. Life will move quickly, you'll drift. Please know that this is part of the practice. The word becomes meaningful not because you hold it perfectly, but because you keep coming back to it again and again. Through the year, it will show you where you're resisting, where you're growing, where you're being asked to soften or to stretch. And slowly, often quietly, it begins to shape how you live, how you make decisions, how you move through your days. If this series has helped you think about intention words differently, feel free to share the word that's finding you this year in the comments. Thank you for being here. Until next time, be well.